James, what's happening today? What are we doing? What's going on?
This is a guerrilla campaign.
Okay.
I don't know how it's happened, but somehow some orange plaques have appeared all over London, which make oblique references to public figures that I think must feature, judging by the hashtag, in this best-selling book called How They Broke Britain, which is out now in paperback. And there is a quote from, what I think is a quote from the book, and a QR code that people can scan in order to find out more.
And who's the author of Said Weighty Tome?
That would be me.
Okay, very
But I'm not the author of this.
Nothing to do with this.
Nothing at all. I'm as surprised as you are. I mean,
Yes.
Not only to encounter this plaque, but also to bump into you just beneath it.
I know, it's peculiar,
on
isn't
a
it?
Tuesday afternoon. Happy days.
Very happy days. So tell me then, paperback's just come out. Who, in terms of who broke Britain, who are we laying the blame at the door of? Who is responsible? Who broke Britain?
There's three central engines of change. One is the media, one is the current iteration of the Tory party with a side order of inadequate opposition, and one is a particular obsession of mine, which is these secretly funded lobby groups that describe themselves as think tanks or educational charities and have successfully infiltrated public discourse and subsequently politics in a quite extraordinary fashion, despite being entirely unaccountable and, as I say, and funded anonymously. So some of the individuals are quite obvious, like Rupert Murdoch and Paul Dacre, the current editor-in-chief of the Daily Mail. Some less obvious. Andrew Neil is there in his capacity as publisher of The Spectator, or chairman of The Spectator, and a godfather of GBBs as well, although he's keen that we all forget that as quickly as possible. Then you've got the politicians. David Cameron is in there because of what took us up to 2016. Boris Johnson is in there, obviously. Jeremy Corbyn is in there because of the paucity of opposition to the plans and the projects that were put in place around 2016 and then subsequently, of course, in 2019. Matthew Elliott, who set up the Taxpayers Alliance and was one of the architects of Vote Leave, is probably the least known name, but arguably the most interesting ingredient in this sort of recipe of chaos and disaster. And then a very short chapter, Dominic Cummings obviously, and then a very short chapter on Liz Truss. And for the paperback, there's a new shortish chapter, not quite as short as Liz Truss, but still relatively short, on Rishi Sunak, which looks more, because by the time you get to Rishi Sunak, you're looking at symptoms of the malaise rather than causes. But he becomes like the embodiment of the shallowness of the talent pool, the talent puddle, if you like, from which public figures, which big offices, government cabinet positions are now being appointed. So we look in some detail at Suella Braverman and then a little bit at 30p Lee Anderson as well, albeit that he's not a Tory anymore. He was when I finished the book. I got him losing his gig as deputy chairman. That got in time, but him actually, and also I got in the bit where he resigned in order to vote for something that he then didn't vote for because people started sniggling at him when he walked into the lobby. I got all that in, but I didn't get the next chapter in that grisly saga where he actually lost the whip from the Conservative Party and ended up signing quite a nice bit of symmetry, because the only person I haven't mentioned who gets a chapter is Nigel Farage. So he then became the latest MP to represent a party that Nigel Farage either leads or sort of is in charge of off stage or whatever it is. The chief shareholder, I think, is the phrase. Majority shareholder.
Yes.
I think that's accurate.
I think it is accurate, yeah.
Yeah.
When you look in the past towards prime ministers that lasted a decade or more, cabinet ministers the same, and yet here you are racing out chapters, and by the time you've published, not only is Lee Anderson no longer in government, he's no longer in the same party, and I mean, Liz Truss,
He could be in a different party by the time this is broadcast.
It's a possibility.
He could have joined yet another one. I mean, it stands up with that little difference, because the themes that I explore aren't changing. The promotion of incompetence, the abandonment of integrity, the complicity of client media, and the failure even to report the truth. So we're talking today on the day that the new checks and inspections kick in on any food being brought into this country. Fruit and vegetable, not yet, but that's on the horizon. And you remember that people like Rhys Mogg, who features in the book, but he doesn't get a chapter, were adamant that our food would be cheaper. I mean, literally they said, buy these magic beans, called Brexit, and your food bill will come down. They didn't say fingers crossed, or with a bit of luck. Yes, it was a promise, it was a pledge, and we bought the beans. The country bought the beans, and food, as a direct consequence of buying those beans, not as some sort of random, unconnected phenomenon, as a direct consequence of buying those Brexit beans, food prices are going up, and companies are warning of enormous, utterly unavoidable difficulties and possible either change of location. I've already spoken to people who've had to relocate large parts, if not the entirety of their business, to continental Europe, because that's where the majority of their clients were. So we're going to end up with more expensive food and less selection. And yet, to open most newspapers this morning, certainly to open the Mail or the Express or the Telegraph, you could be forgiven for not knowing, or at least not fully understanding what the reason is.
What do you think the consequence of this is? It's rare that actually it's so direct and obvious that a lie has been told and the opposite is happening, as it is with this one, but endless promises, endless pledges, undelivered, unfulfilled, that at some point you think people go, do you know what, actually, yes, I was told that Britain would become a sovereign nation. I guess that's happened, but actually at some point I would like a bit of economics. Yes. I would like a bit of increasing living standards. Yes. I am actually going to tune in to LBC between 11 and 1, and I agree with the man on the radio, and I've changed my mind. Yeah. I'm going to turn about face.
Today, actually. Today was a really interesting morning, because a lot of the time recently, and we don't obviously visit the territory anywhere near as often as we did for the 2 or 3 years after 2016, but often we find ourselves as people who, I don't want to sound patronising, but as people who knew what was going to happen, or people who were fairly confident that they knew what was going to happen. There have been a lot of programmes where we've been speculating about where the people who've been duped or the people who've been missold Brexit, where they would be. But today they actually really started ringing in there. We did 2 straight hours on it. We almost exclusively callers say, and I'd say don't say sorry. So there's a bloke who Barry, lovely bloke in Chingford. He's one of the biggest exporters of dancing shoes in the world. He used to do 4,000 pairs of shoes a week. Ballet shoes, Strictly Come Dancing. You need a pair of shoes for your Paso Doble. Barry in Chingford was your man. And he I know he voted leave, because we had a couple of polite but frank exchanges of views in the immediate aftermath. He rang in today, just said sorry. He literally said, I want to apologise to you personally. I said, well, there's no need for that. But he was in Alicante, not Chingford, trying to source a machine for his shoe factory back in England, and everything is harder for him. Getting the machine into the country will be harder. Getting the shoes that he makes out of the country will be harder. Everything is entirely self-inflicted, and I think that you're right. I think that the more the specific detail becomes irrefutable, the more you're living it. So you might walk into Morrison's and see a punnet of or see an empty shelf, or see a punnet of strawberries that's £2 more than it was last summer, and you might not be ready yet to go, well, that is at least in large part because of Brexit. But when you see the numbers written down, and you see people, lorry drivers in Dover, or the head of Birmingham's wholesale market simply describing what is happening, then the unicorns have left the building. You can't, and you've got Jacob Rees-Mogg in a moment of almost unbelievable hypocrisy. Jacob Rees-Mogg, during one of those mad small windows where he actually had a proper job in government, saying, well, we can't possibly introduce these. It would be an act of national self-harm. And we've introduced it today, and it is an act of national self-harm, but it's an act of national self-harm necessitated entirely by the beans that he sold to the country. So, yeah, I, in a way, today's been really interesting, because I've felt my mojo coming back. And to answer your original question, you have to do it. There have been times when I've thought, someone else can do it, but there is something in Orwell which I always misquote. There is truth and there is untruth. If you can hold on to the truth, even if you are the only one, you will not go mad. And we're not the only ones anymore. It's becoming evident and undeniably evident.
So in the context then of how they broke Britain, and that being a clear example of how Britain is broken, how do we fix Britain? And in this instance, is it a case of closer alignment on trading goods and standards? Is it a move towards the single market? I mean, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon for what it's worth.
No,
but in terms of fixing it, and you can use Brexit as an example if you like, what do you want to see? What would you like to see looking forward?
Yeah, well, I think there will be alignment. I don't know whether we can't align enough to remove the friction that we're introducing today and to remove the checks and borders, but that will be the direction of traffic. the recognition that there is nothing of value in having our own regulatory framework. It's already had an island-shaped coach and horses driven through it. So that's just gravity. That is going to have to settle and sink in as time passes. Closer to home, I would hope that if we have a government that's not dedicated to doubling down on demonstrable nonsense, and I've got some sympathy for, I don't think they've got much choice but to double down on demonstrable nonsense, but the Labour Party does, and hopefully, gently, Keir Starmer's Labour Party, if it ends up in government, can start just telling the truth a bit and saying the reason why this is happening is because of that, and then the national mood just slowly begins to change. You're not going to have someone coming in on a steed, waving their flag of St. George and re-establishing the United Kingdom as a major player in the European Union. It's going to be a really incremental and slow process. And recent events suggest that Keir Starmer is very good at softly, gently, gently. Some people think he's too softly, gently, gently, but maybe that's what the situation demands. I don't think it. We don't need an anti-Farage, someone coming in banging drums about, populist drums about we've got to do it. It needs to be a gently engineered shift in the national mood, shift in the music. And if the government lead it, I don't see that the media will have much choice but to follow.
I think with the last 14 years, politically, it's actually just quite a sensible thing to do, which is you project competence.
Or simple competence.
And we will not burn this to the ground. And everyone goes, all right, well, I actually quite fancy a bit of that in the wake of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss in particular.
I like that analogy of burning things to the ground, because when people say you should move on from it, and I got a little bit of that today, although nowhere near as much as I used to get. That's like saying to someone who's had their house burnt down, you should just move on from it. Where am I going to live? Yeah. You've burnt my house down. I'm not going anywhere. Yes, exactly that. So no, I don't buy that either.
Local elections on Thursday. You wouldn't put it past.
You think I'm on the radio? I can actually talk to you about the local
elections.
You can.
Yeah, no, of course you can. Of course you can, James. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. And the by-election in Blackpool South as well, of course, was going to be interesting.
And there is a list of candidates available on there.
No, you don't have to.
No, we don't have to.
I'm so confused.
Okay. There isn't a world in which the Tory party ditches Rishi Sunak after a terrible showing and goes for another leadership contest.
But never say no. I mean, how mad was it to put Liz Truss in Downing Street? And then to pretend within 2 weeks of her leaving Downing Street that it hadn't gone that badly at all. Well, I know she's leading that campaign, but the Daily Telegraph's joined in. On the front pages at the time, finally a true Tory budget. The Liz Truss, the bloke in the tele, Alistair Heath saying this is the finest budget, not just the finest Tory, but it's the finest budget I've ever seen. Country goes off a cliff. And they all just pretend it never happened. So against the backdrop of the madness that we've already witnessed, and the people who've still got at least one hand on the steering wheel of the parliamentary Conservative Party, I'd never say never, but it would just be another mad thing, I think, to bin him. And for whom? Yeah.
Well, I guess you roll the dice, right? You sort of say, oh, it's been so. It can't get any worse. What further harm can it do, right?
That is it. You say it can't get any worse, so we might as well. Yeah. But of course it can. If they've proved anything. If they've proved anything over the last 8 years, because every time you think it can't get any worse, it does, yes.
Yes, indeed it does. Okay, a couple more questions, James, and I'll let you go. I know you have somewhere to be. Since we last spoke, the Rwanda bill has become law. My question to you is a simple one. Will it work? And I mean that first in the sense of will we get flights off the ground? Will that happen? And the second being, will it actually function as a deterrent, which is its stated purpose?
Yeah, I don't know. My feeling is we won't see flights take off. And it's not even the deterrent. It's even if a flight does take off, will it be politically effective? I'm not sure it will, because people are addicted to bad news, or what they consider to be bad news. The old line about it's easier to sell tickets for the ghost train than it is for the speak your weight machine. So even if it were to happen, which is close to improbable, I don't think it would move the dial of people who like queuing up for the ghost train. I want to read about how many people have arrived today on the beach in Dover. It doesn't matter if it's less than last year. If they're still coming, I'm still furious. And that's possibly what they've failed to fully appreciate. And then on the deterrent question, Well, there's claims, isn't there, from Ireland that it's working. People are crossing the border into the invisible border into the Republic of Ireland because they're worried about being deported to Rwanda. And even if that works, it leaves the Tories with a moral and intellectual problem because they are sort of simultaneously claiming that it's a lovely place to go, but also that the thought of being sent there is going to put people off wanting to come here. And that's where the real elephant in the room is the attempt to redefine the meaning of the word unsafe. So the Mail on Sunday this weekend claiming that because the European People's Party has embraced the idea of third country deportation, so a safe third country, they will consider for member states putting asylum processing centres in, and possibly, I haven't looked at the detail, maybe even leaving the refugees there if their application has been successful, but it's a safe country. And the Mail on Sunday actually writing in black and white that this just proves there's nothing wrong with the Rwanda plan because it may as well be it's exactly the same. I heard people on the radio saying it's exactly the same. And of course it's not, because it's still an unsafe country. We've just passed legislation to say that it's safe, which Ken Clarke, that well-known lefty, the former Tory Chancellor Ken Clarke, said you might as well pass a law saying that a cat is a dog. And that seems still to be missing from a heck of a lot of the discourse, especially from the Tory side of the conversation, which is, as ever, and a major theme of the whole book, completely detached from observable reality.
You mentioned Orwell earlier, and it's kind of that double speak almost, right? Yeah. Oh, it is safe because we say it to be so.
Freedom is slavery.
Yes.
Ignorance is strength. Unsafe is safe. I mean, it's up there. It's not even... Usually, there's a bit of hyperbole when you... I had to stop reaching for Orwell a few years ago because it's like, oh, bloody hell, yeah. But, I mean, you tell me, what is the bigger double speak? Freedom is slavery or unsafe is safe? Yeah. They're identical.
What do you think the guiding political... I was going to say principles, but I guess that's also maybe a bit double-speaky. Should we just say, we'll say guiding thoughts behind, is it to demonise? Is it to say we've done something, anything about this? Tell me about the sort of the rationale if you put yourself in the shoes of a Rishi Sunak or a James Cleverly.
Well, I think that they're two very good examples because I don't think that this rhetoric or this project is in their bones. It's not in their blood. They've inherited this from UKIP, really. This idea that the more performatively vicious we can be about immigration in general or refugees in particular, the more political heft we will have. But it never got UKIP over 15-20% on a national ballot, and it won't deliver any bigger numbers than that to the Tories. In fact, it'll be considerably less because you've got UKIP 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever it is, hemorrhaging up people who don't think the Tories are being nasty enough or performatively cruel enough. So I think the rationale is we'll tell them there's a problem. And I mean, for me, all roads lead back to Brexit, which isn't necessarily accurate or even healthy. but if you got away with that, you're sitting around a table and someone says to you, well, look, they're not going to fall for this. We're trying to tell them that this is a major problem. We're trying to pretend it's not our fault, and we're trying to claim that we're the solution. And someone around the table says, they're never going to fall for that, boss. And boss says, let me introduce you to Brexit. So I think that there is maybe a subconscious mindset that thinks, create or invent a massive problem, use othering and demonisation of other humans, dehumanisation, to foment hatred and to foment negativity, and then claim that you're the solution to it. And arguably, the sickness benefit stuff is a better example of what I'm describing, or a double proof of what I'm describing, as Rwanda is, because they are literally now saying to people who are signed off sick, A, that they're skiving, B, that they're the biggest drain on the economy, C, that they need to pull their socks up and get back into work. And I am yet to meet anybody who has found being signed off sick either easy or pleasurable. But according to Mel Stride and his colleagues, there's millions of them in the country. Just, they go to a different school.
I think it's one of the most dangerous things about right-wing populism isn't necessarily the electoral success of the parties themselves. It's the impact they have on the major parties, that they pull them with them, right? They start to co-opt that rhetoric, those politics.
Simon Harris in The Guardian yesterday listed what were BNP policies 15 years ago. There's no spoiler alert here. They're going to be in a manifesto near you at the next general election, or possibly two manifestos near you with reform gathering pace as well. And it was actually staggering because we all thought the BNP were, when Griffin appeared on Question Time, everyone thought, oh, this is a moment. This shows how we deal with fascism in this country. We'll give them enough rope to to harm themselves. But hey ho, 15 years later, and you could almost translate a National Front poster into a Daily Mail op-ed.
James O'Brien, you've got somewhere else to be.
Ollie, always a pleasure, mate.
Thank you,
Good
mate.
to see you.
Cheers.
Thanks.